So we're dealing with the development of a number of documents that deals with auditor competence. It's a project that's run over probably the last 6 to 8 years. And even though we've always known that having competent people in a supreme audit institution is important, I think there was a big need to demystify the concept, if you like, and at the same time then to give structure to processes around that. And through a process of long consultation, got to a point where it's something that's representative of practices in INTOSAI for public sector auditors, and then started expanding to really make it practical. We started adding on guidance on how to expand on a basic competency framework. We started giving guidance on how you can rework this to fit a professionalization pathway. And eventually we got to a point where we realized that it probably makes sense to also lift these developments into the framework of auditing standards, which is what we're hoping we'll achieve by the end of the year. Then there's one thing that sort of sits outside the framework of standards, and that's a guide on human resource practices. The moment you can cope with competencies, of course, your human resource practices can look different. So that's something that we've attended to in the last year, the development of a very current competency-based HR practices guide. And hopefully, again, by the end of the year, that's on the table. It should be achievable. All that 150 does is to make sure that you tick a couple of boxes in your considerations around that. It lists only 4 requirements. It asks you to determine the competencies that you want. It asks you to have HR processes that sit behind it. It asks of you to think about these competencies in a way that will support professional development. And it also asks of you to make sure that you can evaluate and test this for relevance. And that's quite generic and broad. The way that the standard's been set up is quite interesting because it gives us requirements, but then it gives you application guidance. But it can mean different things for different people. So you'll see in the application guidance that there's a generic process of decisions that you make to get to the requirement, and that should give you the flexibility to reach that end goal. So absolutely feasible. So when we say determine competencies, there's a guideline that speaks about how you develop a competency framework. When there's a requirement that say, tie your mind to a professionalization pathway, there's a guideline that speaks to it. Even on the HR practices and the assessment, that's the reason why we've developed the HR guide. So it's supposed to be a full suite of, but sits in that formal framework of standards. Over and above that, of course, there's massive support in INTOSAI. We've got the luxury of our friends at IDI, the INTOSAI Development Initiative, many other providers that's in this area that can back people up. Not forgetting that the strongest form of support is probably in peer-to-peer, where one audit office speaks to another and have sharing. So it should be covered at the level of formal requirements, good guidance, but also a massive suite of support tools that can assist. We realize that we need to share very freely, but this free-flowing environment need to have some governance structure. So that's what's happening at a governing board and at Congress this year in Rio in Brazil. It's important because that's where all these developments get final approval. It goes through a governing board structure where the approval takes place. It goes through a conference where it's adopted. It's important to know that when you do something, especially at the level of standards, that the community subscribes, that it makes sense. So that's the first part. It's a confirmation that you're on the right track. It's a confirmation that we're clear on what our relevance is at the moment, but it's also a statement of intent. It is what needs to happen next. The second part is, of course, then to talk about the future. And we shift from crafting the basic pronouncements to implementation support. We feel very strong about creating a community of practice where people can share ideas and where there can be appropriate peer-to-peer support. So that's the importance of conference, that we can confirm, that we can commit, and that we can strategize for the future. Traditionally in INTOSAI, AG officers see each other at least once in 3 years. And it's a wonderful occasion when you bring 195 AGs together in one country and in one meeting. We had that privilege in 2010, and it's massively important to understand what these leaders feel, how they see the world play out, etc. It is the place where we anchor all our governance in this body. Remember that INTOSAI is a volunteer body. Yes, we're members, but the membership is not in the nature where you can force anybody to do anything. It's by persuasion. It's by being relevant.